Today I want to talk about creating drama in your painting, especially working from photographs, because photographs can be notoriously bad for muted color when it should be brighter. The light's too light, the dark's too dark. But even outside, we want to be able to look and compare and know when to push the lights maybe a bit brighter or the darks a bit darker, just to get a bit more drama in the painting. So I have some photographs here. This first one is from Georgia. Nice early morning backlit trees and barns. And this photograph's pretty good. Shadows aren't too dark over in here. They are right in there, just a bit too dark. But some nice light in these trees. This color's a bit dead in the shadow. And a little bit here too. I want to think of these colors as a definite color from the color wheel. And then I can mute them, I can make them cooler, a bit lighter to make them recede or darker to come forward, but have a definite color in mind as opposed to just the drab deadness of photographic color. And the lights look pretty light, but if I mix these lights in here just as I see them, they're not going to be bright enough to really show how bright and intense the light really is. So one thing you can do to help you be able to add more drama or push the contrast more in your painting is just to paint outside more. Even if you never like painting outside and nothing ever turns out, just being out there for an hour, mixing colors that you see and putting them next to each other really improves your color sense. And you can tell that when you've painted outside for a while, photographs look really dull. And right away you get the sense of where you need to push the color a little bit more, push the temperature contrast or the value contrast to get a bit more drama in your painting. So on this, my changes here are to really push the brights in here, these bright areas in the foliage, a lot lighter. And then also to get a bit more color in these shadows in the background. I did get those shadows a bit lighter and cooler. Still muted, but it's a muted blue now instead of just a muted blah color. Same thing with the orange here. That's orange and violet, dioxazine purple, instead of just kind of a nondescript dark color there. So also in the foliage on this side, a little bit too dark. I need a bit more color variation in there. So going from orange green to a little bit of orange, yellow green. It's still shadow, but just a bit lighter so that you can see a color in it. And same thing in the foreground, a bit more violets in here and oranges, orange and violet mixed together, and some of it separate, just to punch up the color and get it away from photographic color. This is some bad color here in the foreground in the photograph, but I think making it a bit stronger with violets and oranges cools it, plus gives some of the local color and the green. That just adds a bit more drama to the painting. Now the next photograph is in Yosemite. And with this photograph, you really get, I think, you get overwhelmed with all the detail in the cliff. You got all those subtle patinas on there, on the rock, different colors, different values, cracks and crevices, all the stuff going on in the trees here, all the rocks in the foreground, all the shrubbery in here, and the details on the trees. It just gets kind of overwhelming. So you want to be able to look at the photograph and see past all that stuff and get to what's basic, just basic shape and value. So if I have one value here, one value for the trees, two values for the dark and light of the rocks in the background, one value here, maybe a couple of values in the rocks, eliminate a lot of this detail. It's going to be a lot easier to see and set up and decide where I want to add some value. So you can see here, I've picked, well, a couple of colors in here, a couple of values. White and orange with a tiny bit of violet, and white and violet with a tiny bit of orange, just to show a little bit of light and halftone. They're both on the light side, but it gives it a little form. And just two values in the greens there, one value here in these foreground shadowed trees, maybe a couple of values in the rocks down below. But when I simplify it like that, it is much easier to get the right relationship between the big shapes, like between the rocks and the trees and the background trees and the sunlit rocks, and so on. You can just so much easier get the relationships of color and value better when you reduce it to just those simple shapes. And a lot of times back in the studio, I will take something like this and I will do a small 5x7, 6x8, whatever shape my canvas, bigger canvas is going to be, and just do a small color study like this, where I'm simplifying the detail, or even a pencil drawing of a thumbnail, just reducing it to basic shapes and maybe 2 or 3 values. It really helps you to see your subject better. So you can see when I can simplify it like this to simple, dark, and light, that's a lot more effective color value-wise than this. Now, this isn't finished, but this is where I want to get to the painting before I start thinking about detail. And here I can think maybe the most detail will go in the rocks, second most in the trees here, then maybe a little bit in the foreground, tiny bit in these trees, and even less back in the background, so that I can decide where I want the detail. Because the more simple I can keep this, the easier it is for the viewer to read the painting. If I get more photographic with the detail and the colors and values, it becomes really hard to look at. It looks like it was painful to paint. And we can make it a bit more simple and help it to read better when we go for the finished painting. Now the next photo here, this is a photograph back in the early digital camera days, so not a very good photo. It does have good contrast between the trees, the tree and the rock and the sky, or the tree and the rock and the ground. Good value range there. Color is very dull. Color in the sky is washed out, doesn't have anything in the sky at all. And there's not much contrast in the foreground. The sun was very low, early morning, so sun was right about here and coming this way, and it was hitting the taller grass here in front. But again, the camera didn't pick up enough of the contrast. So I want to push that. You see this light on the tree trunk here that really emphasizes the form real nicely right there. So I'm going to add to that on the tree and on the rock and in the tall grasses. Kind of, again, pop that contrast and create a bit more drama as far as the light goes. This is Rocky Mountain National Park in December. If you want to go there where there's nobody around, go December or January, because there's virtually nobody there for days. So had the whole place to myself, and really a little too cold to paint almost, but got a lot of good references. Winter's a great time because the lack of the green. Summer's just way too green there. So I'm able to get the different colors of the winter trees. The grass is more yellow and orange, and then the white snow really contrasts stuff. But what I want to do here is I'm pulling this tree together, popping the green, maybe a bit too green. That's maybe a bit too strong of a green. But I'm filling in a bigger mass and shape and designing that shape, not so detailed as the photograph. So I filled it out a bit more so it reads as a more definite shape, using kind of the rim lighting on the tree and the rock to show the form better, to show what the light is doing and what light direction it's coming from. Same thing with these trees. That rim lighting on the trees gives more suggestion of what the light is doing. And then pushing temperature contrast in the grass and the rock, a little more color in the grass in the foreground, and then the bright sunlight that's coming through and hitting in front of the tree and the rock there. You can see the difference. That drama created by more contrast, more temperature contrast, and value contrast. And then the sky, just breaking up the sky with more patches of blue and having the white being a pattern of clouds, which creates a lot more interest than just a blank sky in there. And detailing the rock here, adding just a little bit of detail as opposed to all the detail that comes in the photograph. Now I can add more past this, but I have to get to this spot first before I start adding more. And then be selective. I don't have to detail the whole thing just like the photograph shows. I can add just a little bit of detail in a spot or two to be more effective, because the more simple the shapes, the more effective the painting is. Now the next one here is in Sheridan, Wyoming. So here's the photograph, Sheridan. And nice light. It's kind of midday, so the light's kind of flat. But good shadows on the trees. Shadows below here. Some dark shadows there. Dark fence posts against light grass. There's a lot of contrast. There's nice depth. Although the depth isn't very much, because the green in the background is just as green as the middle ground and foreground. So really not nice depth. I take that back. But I want to push a couple of things. I want to push the shapes in the trees and push the temperature a lot more. The temperature change or temperature contrast is really going to show a lot more than the photograph does midday. So these are my changes. And starting with the background, I raised up the background a bit more and went a lot more blue-green than just green. Almost blue instead of blue-green, but there's a hint of blue-green in there. And that makes it stay back compared to the yellow green of the grass. And that jump from the blue-green to the yellow-green is pretty strong, and that creates a lot more drama and interest than the photograph. Also, the foreground, middle ground, background grass, I've got 3 different colors. I've got the yellow-green right here, which is cad yellow light, ultramarine blue, and a little bit of probably alizarin crimson to make that. I mean, this is computerized, but that's what I would use to get this color. Same thing here, yellow, blue, with a little bit of crimson, not as much white, not as much yellow. It's a bit more of a different color grass. And that difference creates some depth. If I make it all the same color and value of the grass, it's not going to have any depth to it. And then the foreground grass, a lot stronger, a lot more yellow, green, more saturated. Few darker accents in front, a little busier, and that comes forward compared to this and to that. And then pushing the temperature in the house. You can see how it's a nice color even in the photograph, but if you can push it a bit more, think beyond the photograph or think outside the box as far as the color goes compared to the photograph to get some more interest in there. Also, the trees has a nice shadow shape, but the lights and halftones and some of the shadows just get blended together. So creating more definite shape. Now I would soften the edges. I don't soften the edges on the computer, but if I did this in paint first, I would soften the edges. Plus, just using paint and putting these 2 values together, you're going to get some softer edges. Same thing in this one. I got 2 values in the shadow, 1, 2, and then 1 value in the light. Really keep them all separate. Again, with oil paint, that would blend slightly or have some variation of hard and soft edge, which I don't on the computer. And a lot cooler, darker cast shadows. Organizing these shadows down below here, into a definite shape as opposed to just the randomness of the photo. There's really no definite pattern of the shadow down below. But when you create one, again, creates more drama, more interest, more sense of dark and light than the photograph has. Next one is in Mount Carmel, New Mexico. And I like the photograph, the composition. Again, this is one of those early digital cameras, and the color's just dead. It's like a little bit of raw or burnt umber in everything. So it really deadens all the colors, or a little bit of black. It's black in the white and orange, black in this, black in the trees, black in the barn. It's all just really too muted color-wise. And then the sky gets blown out, way too much light, so we lose the value change of the darker blue sky and the pattern of clouds. They stick out a little bit, but not enough. So here's my changes. Shadows on the barn are still muted, but they're not a dead muted color. They're more of a muted blue, where this is just a muted gray. If you could mute gray even more muted than it is. Same thing here, it's a muted violet as opposed to just a gray, and a muted orange instead of just gray. When I punch the colors, I still want some muted colors, just not that muted. Not as muted as the photograph gets. There's just no sense of light, even though we can see the shadows and the light area, and we think, well, it's a sunlit day, because the photograph looks like reality, but I think this works much better. Popping the lights in the shrubbery in the foreground, the rim lighting and lights on the trees in the middle ground, a little bit more color in the background. You can see the blue in the sky, 2 or 3 values of blue is kind of a dark middle value, and then the light value here. So 3 values there to make that recede, but just more contrast value-wise and temperature-wise. The lights in this are almost more half-toned. There's not very many light there, or very much lights there, but when you pop it, now the lights stand out. They really separate from the shadows a lot more. A lot less halftone on this bright of a day. This is in Georgia, northern Georgia. It's an apple tree in spring next to an old chicken barn, which there are a ton of them in northern Georgia. But they make nice barn. I like the blossoms on this tree. That's what I was after. But they're too spotted. There's too many little individual blossoms. Becomes too busy, and also the background trees here are too busy. Too many individual trees, too many tree trunks. It just makes that area in the background too busy, and it competes with the foreground of the apple tree. And simplify the grass a bit more. So this is what I came up with. Pulling those background trees together, I have 2 values, kind of a light blue-green and then a darker, kind of a muted violet. I could go just a darker blue-green to get some darker shadows back in there, but switched it up to violet. It's the value that matters, so I wanted a little different color. And then I pulled the apple blossoms together. Simple dark and light pattern of bigger shapes as opposed to a bunch of individual dots. It's way too dotted. So never hesitate to pull something together like that. Even the trunk here, it's pretty good light on the trunk in the photograph, but by pushing it more contrast, bigger lights, also getting rid of all the stuff back in here that you see in the photograph, too much clutter, and it distracts from that tree trunk. So by eliminating that tree trunk really pops out. Now the tree trunk is by far the focal point. But yet the trees still have some interest in the background, but a lot more simple. And I pulled together some of the shadows in the foreground. Well, that will do it. Hope that helps in understanding how to make some changes in your reference when you're painting it, and not just copying the photograph verbatim. And if you did like it, go ahead and push like and subscribe if you would. And if you still want more information on mixing colors when using photographs, because that can be tricky, go to this or watch this next video called Mixing Color to Show the Light.